It's fat.
Fat literature.
We're here to celebrate Langston Hughes, and we know you've written this wonderful children's book, Love to Langston.
Yes.
And we wanted to know a little more about the journey. How'd you start, this book, and what has been the reaction? We'd love to hear about it.
Well, Langston was turning 100, and I thought it would be a good idea to do a biography of Langston, but in verse, through poetry, not the usual straight narrative. So it was basically done in a rather short time by myself and R. Gregory Christie, who's a great artist. I did a lot of research on it, reading all of Langston's books, listening to Langston on CD when he was playing with Charlie Mingus. Just trying to get into the Langston psyche, so that the book is actually in the first person, as I would imagine Langston today.
And one of the other comrades who was unable to come here today, Willie Perdomo, did something similar along the lines, do you think?
Yeah, Willie did a book called Visiting Langston, which is from the vantage point of a young girl and her father, who takes her on this trip to visit Langston Hughes' house in Harlem, where he spent the last 20 years of his life. And she's a writer herself, she's a poet herself.
And what do you think? I mean, Langston was very big, of course, during the Harlem Renaissance, and towards the end of his life, the reaction with his work was less. There was less of a reaction in his work, but he's such a great literary figure. What has been the reaction? I mean, are the children in the schools reading him? What are they reading in the university? What has been, from teaching in New York, for example, then teaching at Howard, and also doing this book, are they reading Langston, and what has been his influence on the
Langston's been taught for decades. He's taught, every generation has goes through Langston in the school systems, in college. So he's being taught. His influence is that the Harlem Renaissance predates the Black Arts Movement. So whenever you talk about the Black Arts Movement, which took place in the 1960s through the 70s, you're talking about Langston Hughes was one of the proponents of the Black Arts, even before people like Amiri Baraka and Sonia Sanchez and Haki Madhubuti. So, he's very influential.
But wouldn't you say, I think what Natalie was saying also is that, he was known as an African-American poet, and now, and why is it taking so long for him to become, internationally acclaimed? He was internationally accepted in certain circles, but he was still always identified as an African-American poet. And I think we're kind of curious, what your take is on why did it take so long, up to a centennial, for him to finally get, the major due that,
well, it hadn't taken so long because Langston was always lauded, and he was an international poet even before a lot of people who call themselves internationals. You see his influence in the Caribbean, you see his influence in Africa with the Negritude movement, you see his influence with Nicolas Guillen of Cuba.
And at the time, he was such a traveler. He had gone to so many places, and I think apart from Australia and Antarctica, I think were the only places he hadn't been. He was such a traveler.
Yeah, and he was in Russia. He was in China. He translated the works of many great writers like Federico Garcia Lorca.
But I think also the point I'm trying to make is that in terms of academic circles, and there's still some academics who don't want to take him seriously. They say he's a lyrist. He's really a musical poet. He's not like a real poet. But now we've got these symposiums, these annual symposiums that are done in Kansas, and I'm sure you've been to some of them, that are really focusing on the seriousness of his work.
Well, a lot of the critics used to say that, because Langston communicated with the masses, because his work was very understandable, they try to put him in a category saying his work was simple. Even James Baldwin criticized Langston for that. But then he had to turn around and say, I was wrong about that. And also Amiri Baraka made a criticism of Langston's work without really reading the depth of it. But now he says that Langston, is the man. He's the one. Langston was an innovator. He took the blues form and put it into American poetry. He took jazz and poetry and blended them together before the Beat Generation, before the Black Arts poets, before anyone. He was the one who did that.
So I wanted to also ask you, in one of your interviews, you speak about prolific writers as organic intellectuals. What do you mean by that?
Well, Malcolm X is an organic intellectual. An organic intellectual, the phrase comes from Antonio Gramsci, a great Marxist-Leninist from Italy. It's someone who comes from the grassroots, from folk, from the people, and they gain their education through the people and not through the academy. You know, so that's what an organic intellectual is.
Like yourself.
And like
I'm both. I'm organic, intellectual, and also because I went and got the degrees later on in life, the PhD or whatever, I have both. You know, the academy and the grassroots.
Would you say that Langston Hughes is an organic intellectual?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Self-taught.
Yeah.
Self-taught.
And so, you know, going back to what Natalie had mentioned earlier about, you know, this great book, how the, you know, just talk about a little bit what the reaction is with the kids, and are they getting it, and are they?
Kids love this book because they're able to, like, you know, it's very lyrical. They're able to perform it. It's been used, I heard, several times in performances by students. They do choreo poems with it, and they get inspired by it.
Does this kind of surprise you, or was this your expectation?
Well, I didn't know. I didn't know what to expect.
Really?
You know, I just wanted to do justice to Langston's legacy.
Are these the first children's books that have been written that's focused on him?
Alice Walker did the first one, and there's been several of them, but this one is one of the few children's picture books on Langston, and Willie did one, of course. So I would say Alice Walker's book on Langston, Love to Langston, and Visiting Langston would be a good set for teachers to use in the classroom.
When I saw you in that film, and that's the first time I ever saw you, I was just so struck by that. And, you know, a lot of people try to write poetry for Langston Hughes, or try to take riffs from some of his poetry to incorporate it into a piece. And that piece seemed to work really, really well in the film, and that's what really caught my eye. And I'm just curious, what motivated you to do it, and, I mean, what was the process for you?
The process was a lot of research, just on more than I had received in, I think, 6th grade. I think that's the only introduction I had to Langston, because in college I was a science major, so I was really focused on that. So my whole knowledge of Langston came on my own, like Tony spoke about an organic intellectual. You kind of are digging in the books and crates or whatever to find your own experience. But for me, it was more so researching, reading his work, his love of music and jazz. I do my poetry to music, and it's all through his work, you know, the love of jazz, the love of blues, and it's rhythmic. And so for me, you know, I walked around Harlem trying to figure out if Langston was here, you know, or if I could speak to his spirit, what would I say? You know, these are the things that are happening in Harlem now. You know, I walk around, I walk past the block on 127th Street where we actually filmed the documentary, and just trying to put into words what I saw, and maybe it might have been similar to the things he saw, because he was very sensitive, you know, a lover of people, and the despair and the joy and the inspiration of black people.